Hi, and welcome to Mid-South Viewpoint. I'm Byron Tyler. Pleasure to have you here on today's program. It's great to get back with old friends, those that you've had relationships with maybe a long time ago, and you haven't seen in a while. Maybe occasionally Facebook post. Thankful for Facebook because you can keep up with people that way now. But to actually sit down and visit with them, I'm looking forward to doing that today with a dear friend, David Hamilton. We used to do ministry together back in church in the youth group, and we were both teaching. I don't know what we were thinking. We were teaching junior high, I think. What were we thinking, David?
We weren't.
We weren't thinking.
Not at all.
But what a time of growth. Mm-hmm. And sometimes not so much for the kids as much as for us, too, as learning just the needs of people and where people are and identifying where people are. You know, it's so important. Ministry is such a big word, mm-hmm. you know, and it can be, I think so many define it in a very boxy, and you know what I'm saying, the terms they use. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yeah. Even with our business, you know, people say, well, is your business a ministry? Is your ministry a business? You know, and it's like, I don't even know what that means. Yeah. You know, our business exists to support ministry. How's that?
I like that. Yeah. And that's really what is our purpose as followers of Jesus Christ. That's really our chief end, isn't it? Mm-hmm. To bring him glory and to allow him to, as we were praying that, I just thought about that verse about if you abide in me and my word abides in you, you know, apart from me, you can do nothing, of course, but also abiding in him to produce the fruit for his benefit and favor, not necessarily ours, you know.
Right.
I mean, obviously, he takes care of his children, but to know that as we abide in him, truly abide in him, that we experience the things that God wants to do in this world. And, of course, number one is to express the grace and knowledge of Jesus Christ.
Well, you know, Jesus is not here anymore.
Yeah.
So we're Jesus.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
We're Jesus with skin on. You know, he left us the Holy Spirit, but you know, we have to act and react and be Jesus to everybody that we see.
Did you grow up in the Memphis area?
I actually did not. I actually was born in Charlotte, North Carolina. Grew up in Ohio. Moved here the summer before my senior year of high school, here to Memphis.
See, that's something I did not realize.
Yeah.
Now, when you moved here, was your father like what type of business did he do?
He was actually in the tire business, General Tire, and he was transferred to Memphis to open up 4 facilities, which is ultimately how I started my business.
I had a chance to meet your father, and what a guy! And I know that you had a very, very special relationship with him.
Yes, I did. He was my mentor. He's my best friend, and really gave me the idea for the business opportunity they had because. As you know, part of my story is I really struggled in school and dealt with dyslexia and learning disabilities. And so college was not in my future. And so I knew I had to do something besides, you know, unload tires.
Yeah.
I said, well, I'll not be unloading tires the rest of my life. And that's definitely not the truth.
Well, you know, it's interesting, too, though, the values you learned, you know, through that. Mm-hmm. I myself have discovered that I'm dyslexic. Didn't know until way later in life, and didn't realize that was one of the reasons why I wasn't able to go to college, even though I tried, and it just didn't work. But you learned something, David, I think is so valuable, and that is hard work and the value of hard work.
Yes. You know, hard work can overcome a lot of errors in your life. You know, you can not be good at something, but you just keep trying and trying and trying. Eventually, you're going to get it.
Yeah.
And eventually you're going to be successful if you just keep after it.
Talking about youth, because you and I both have a heart for young people, mm-hmm. And it seems like as we look at today's generation, and everybody, as we get older, it's today's generation, but it's probably in all generations, and not just with youth, it's with all peoples, mm-hmm. you know, when it comes to work ethic and working hard and what it can produce, you know, and valuing hard work.
Right. Well, and hard work is not something that you inherit, like the ability to play basketball or, you know, the ability to sing. You have to, if you want to be a hard worker, you have to work hard.
Yeah. Well, hey, that's a good word right there.
There you go.
Yeah. You got to work hard. And there's opportunities, plenty of opportunities to do just that. And you spent many years unloading trucks.
I did. Yeah, that's how I got my spending money when I was in high school. Like I said, I moved here the summer before my senior year of high school. So I spent my senior year going to school, getting out of school about 2:30, driving across town to South Memphis as fast as I could so I could unload a trailer, and which eventually turned into a business idea.
That business today is going strong and based here in Memphis?
Yes, it is. Based here in Memphis, we have about 1,600 employees over 7 states, and our annual revenue last year was about $50 million.
Wow.
And that's 28 years later.
And that's something that God did, really.
God did it all.
Wow.
Yeah, anybody can look at me and say, David, there's no way you could have pulled that off, and you are absolutely right. I remember Dr. Rogers said one time when he got an award, you may remember this, he said, if you're walking down the road and you see a turtle sitting on top of a fence post, you know he didn't get there by himself.
I love that. I remember.
That's me.
I remember that story. You know what? And I can identify with that myself, too. And isn't that wonderful? Because we know really who gets the honor and the glory,
Absolutely.
where it truly goes when that takes place. What about your journey with Jesus? When and how did that begin? I don't think I know that story.
Well, I don't have one of those testimonies that on May 4th, I went forward and prayed to receive Christ. And I mean, I did that as a very young child. And I don't know if that's really when I became a Christ follower. But there's one thing I do know, that right now I am a disciple of Christ. I'm a follower of Christ. And, I've been baptized, I think 3 times, when that, you've experienced that. But it has been a journey. And, I was very fortunate to grow up in just solid, Christian home. I was in church, 3 or 4 times a week, and learned to love the church, learned to love the people in the church. And so that's been a foundation for our family as well.
Well, David, again, as you referred to Adrian Rogers, another story that he shared when it comes to that very point of, knowing when we were saved, or that point when we did come and to trust Christ. Mm-hmm. He remembered the illustration about going on a trip. If we're going to go to Little Rock and I'm driving a car, you're flying a plane. When I cross the bridge, I see a sign that says, "Welcome to Arkansas." And I get to Little Rock,
right.
2.5 hours later.
Right.
You're in an airplane and you're traveling to Little Rock, and it lands, and the pilot says, "We're now in Little Rock."
Right.
Well, you don't know when you cross the border, but you're in Little Rock.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So very similar what happens in our journey. Mm-hmm. Everybody's different.
Yep.
What about meeting Ruth, your wife? When did you meet her? How did you meet her?
Well, we went to the 1 year that I was here for high school. We went to school together. I sat a couple of seats from her during chapel 3 or 4 times a week. And we never really spoke much during high school. But after high school, I asked her out on a date, and the rest is history.
Rest is history.
Yep.
Now, you have 2 daughters.
2 daughters, Hannah and Leah. Hannah is 21, and Leah is almost 24. In a few days, she'll be 24.
Now, I know back in those days when I first met you, I know that, of course, you had an interest and a love for ministry. You were working with youth. And I think you took some trips on church trip, mission trips and things like that too, didn't you?
Sure did. Actually, the very first mission trip that Ruth and I went on was before kids. And that was in 1990 when, you may recall, when Bellevue took that giant group to Brazil. And Dr. Rogers preached, and we worked all over, actually, Niterói, Brazil, the sister city to Rio. That was my first international experience, my first situation where I went outside the country, went outside of myself, saw what poverty was, and saw how people were living by faith. First time I had ever seen that. Came home. We had a couple of kids, but then ultimately went down to Honduras in 1998 with the church again, leading a trip of students. And it was after Hurricane Mitch had ravaged the whole country of Honduras. And so we went down there and started working, and all the things that I experienced in Brazil just came rushing back to me. The big difference this time was when I got back home, I now had this business that had begun to grow, and I had begun to put infrastructure around me to the point where, I couldn't do everything myself, so I had to hire people, right? Well, that began to grow my business. I didn't know that was a business principle. I learned that. When you learn to delegate, you can grow. And so I had learned that. And so when I got back to Memphis, and I said to Ruth, I said, we have this business. and God's blessing it tremendously. And it's obviously not me. So there's got to be something bigger in store for us than just more money or a bigger house or a nicer car. And so then we began to go back to Honduras and back and back and back, and then ultimately formed our own organization called Point of Impact.
Point of Impact, a faith-based ministry you started back in 2006 with your wife, as you seek to take the gospel of Christ to the nations by loving the least of these. And when you talk about the least of these, you mentioned that poverty in Brazil, the poverty in Honduras. Yeah. How does that compare to the poverty we see here in Memphis?
Well, we definitely have poverty in Memphis. The big difference is we have a backstop. You know, we have our government, thank goodness, that provides welfare, provides housing, and all those kind of things. Those things don't exist in third world countries. And if you're poor and you have, say you have no leg, for instance, you have one leg, so you can't do the work that other people can do. There's no government assistance for you like there is in this country.
Yeah. One of the things that I really appreciate about Point of Impact is the fact that you're not just going there and saying, well, this is what we've got to do for you to make things better, and we're going to do this in Jesus' name, amen. You're actually working through the local church. You have found 3 or 4 churches that are like-minded, 4 churches that are like-minded. Tell us about how did you come up with that idea and about how you built these relationships?
Well, it was interesting the way that began. I never would call myself a church planner. It was another thing that I kind of just stumbled into as I was there. What I found was we were beginning to do work with young men and women that had come out of gangs and, you know, with tattoos on their faces and things like that. And unfortunately, most churches were afraid of those people. And, you know, they obviously would kind of shun them if they came into their church.
Just like the churches in America.
Basically, yes, unfortunately. So we just figured, hey, instead of trying to find a church that will bring in these folks that we're working with, we'll just start one. And, you know, that was my training on church planting. My seminary degree was, I went to Honduras, kids and adults that are just dirty and all that, needed a church. So we found a building and hired a pastor.
I love it.
That's church planting.
I love it.
Now, we've made every mistake along the way, by the way. So
Sure. And what are some of the lessons you've learned along the way?
Well, I like to quote Matthew Barnett. He wrote a book, The Cause Within You. And he said, if you wait until you have a business plan, money, training, and all these things before you ever start doing anything, you'll never do anything. What I've learned to do is to just take advantage of the opportunity that you have. If you can help one person, if there's a homeless person that you see on a regular basis on the corner, instead of just handing them $1 and keep going or giving them nothing, get out of the car and talk to them. Find out what their story is. Find out why they're there and do something about that. That's something that, probably is not going to cost you much except for time. I guess what I'm saying is what I've learned along the way is to do what you can with what you have. And, I tell students all the time, they'll say, David, you have this business, so you can afford to do these things. You can travel around the world and you can, have orphanages and all this kind of stuff. I want to be that when I grow up or when I get a job. And I tell them the same thing every time. If you don't do something with the $5 you have in your pocket right now that you don't need, that you have all you're going to do is maybe just go waste it somewhere. You're going to buy another coffee or you're going to go to a movie or something. Do something with those dollars, and then you'll learn to when God will continue to bless you with things and he can trust you with things that he'll give you more.
Wow. That's a spiritual lesson, isn't it? I mean, he trusts those with a little. If he can trust us with little, then we know that he can trust us with more.
Right.
And I like, too, what you said about finding out their story, and that takes time sometimes. We have sometimes a tendency to think about just going by and filling people up with the gospel. People need the gospel, but people, I think, also want to be heard. They want their heart to be acknowledged, taking time, and that can be a process. And especially, you had that gap, too, of language because do you speak Spanish?
Very little.
Very little?
Yeah.
I speak none,
Very little.
But you know a little bit.
Yeah.
But when you get into the heart issues of knowing how to speak the language, I know you've probably seen God do some great work through that, especially when you're talking about dealing with gangs because the gangs, they're pretty much in a hopeless situation in their eyes.
Right. The gang is the family. So when the family breaks down, that's when the gang comes in and takes over. and because that becomes their family essentially.
Now, as I talk about these 4 churches in Honduras, and Honduras is not the only ministry area. You also are in Africa now.
That's right. We're in Kenya and also Tanzania.
In similar type of work?
Very similar.
Okay.
Yeah. It's all of our work. The foundation of it is children between kindergarten and 6th grade coming to our programs every day, getting a hot meal, getting medical treatment, and getting taught the Word of God. That's where the church begins, and then everything grows out from that. And we do that, like I said, in Tanzania, Kenya, and in the capital city of Tegucigalpa, Honduras.
And David, that is so critical, those developmental years. If you can reach, you look at today, sometimes a teenager, how do they get to be that way,
Right.
I mean, if we can go back to where you're working with these kids now,
right,
foundationally, that's the best place to begin.
Well, they need good health care. They need a well-balanced meal. So we check on their nutrition. A lot of our kids come to us are malnourished. And so they can't learn, they can't remember, they can't think if they're not getting good nutrition. So we take care of that. Another very important statistic specific to Honduras, if you can get a child through the 6th grade, they're 60% more likely to graduate high school. If they graduate high school, then they have a small chance in these communities to go to college, but they'll have a chance to be able to be productive citizens if they can just graduate high school.
Of course, the nutrition value for their brain development at those ages is so critical, too. Yes. Other things I noticed you medical-wise deal with are respiratory infections and severe malnutrition. I mean, we're talking severe, like you see some of these TV commercials, or how severe?
Well, it's interesting. I've learned something about malnourishment. You can be malnourished and actually be overweight because it's what you eat. If it's not balanced, if it's nothing but rice, beans, and tortillas, and that's all you ever eat, you're going to actually be fat, but be very unhealthy. And that's most of our kids come to us that way, not emaciated and skinny like you would see in like on TV.
Well, see, there's something I didn't realize. Now, tutoring, which is part of the educational process, you build relationships with teachers. Do you train teachers, or how do you work with teachers in doing the tutoring?
Well, we actually have 42 staff members in Honduras. A good portion of those are teachers. They're actually accredited teachers. So in Honduras, you go to school a half a day. So if they're in their school, public school, from say till 8 to noon, then they come to our program from like 1 to 4. And what we're doing is actually teaching them what they should be learning in the public school, because the public schools there are very deficient. They don't have textbooks. They just go in a room and they have a teacher and they take out their notebooks and they take notes if they have a notebook and stuff like that. So what we do is we actually find out what their lesson plans are from their teachers in public school, and then our teachers are very specific and teach them what they're supposed to be learning. So it's simple to say, easy to say, our kids are the top of all their classes because they're being taught.
And they're working alongside the teacher, too.
Right.
Which I'm sure the teacher probably appreciates that.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Because they're the well-behaved kids. They're the ones that have their supplies, because, we do the backpack drive program every year, so that gives a kid a backpack, all their school supplies for a year, a school uniform, new shoes. All that gets given to them when they start the school year in February. Their school year begins in February, ends in November.
Another foot or a pillar of what you guys do through Point of Impact is sports. And I know kids like to get all that energy out, and sports is a great way to do that.
Right. And it's a great attraction too. Football, soccer, as we call it in the States, if you go to Honduras, they only play one sport. And it's soccer. And if you can walk, you're kicking something. So when you put a soccer league together and give them a uniform and a decent place to play, you're going to have a crowd.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's a great hook.
What is normal or average family life for the kids that you're dealing with, the type of homes they come from?
Wow. A lot of these kids have relatives, maybe even a father or mother that are gang affiliated. A lot of them, most of them live in single-parent situations. AIDS is rampant in Honduras, so we have a lot of our kids that have lost a parent to AIDS. So you have kids living with aunts and uncles or grandparents. And when we choose our kids to be in our program, we seek out the worst. We seek out who's got the most needs. So the lion's share of our kids are either single parent or extended family situations as they live. Extreme poverty. They'll live on $60, $70 a month maybe. You know, mom or aunt or grandmother's probably selling tortillas, or dad's making shoes, or one of those kinds of entrepreneurial kind of things, because 60% unemployment in Honduras, so there's not a lot of jobs.
So when you say the least of these, you literally mean the least of these.
Absolutely.
And, you know, there's some organizations that segment of the population is not who they want to work with. But it says, because this is not going to change. Right. I mean, there's even Christian ministries I've heard that have that philosophy. Right. That I'm not going to go there because it's not going to really be worth our effort, our resources. We need to maybe move to the next level up.
Everyone wants return on investment. You know, you want results. For us, we look at, you know, how the churches are growing. You know, are we reaching those kids' parents? We're obviously reaching them. Are we reaching their extended family of parents? Are our church growing? Are we baptizing people? That's, you know, we don't measure how many people say they prayed to receive Christ, because in a country like Honduras, I think everyone has at least 3 or 4 times, because it's so easy to get someone to do that. Yeah. You just ask them. I mean, no, they don't want to go to hell. I'll pray that prayer. Right. But teaching them to become a Christ follower and then ultimately be baptized, that's a big deal. And so that's how we measure that. But, you know, one of the things that frustrated me early on as I got into this ministry, when we would approach folks or churches or whatever, say, hey, would you like to help us? One of the first things they start talking about is, what is your exit strategy? And I can tell you, Byron, that really frustrated me, because when I'm looking at a kid who's starving and has no hope for the future, you know, why should I be concerned about an exit strategy? These churches are never going to support themselves. It won't happen. And that's what a lot of ministries want to see happen. They want to see a church started, planted, and then, okay, we'll walk away. You stand on your own 2 feet and support yourself. Well, if you have a community of believers that average wage is $100 a month, and you have a pastor and you have a feeding program and you have a medical clinic and all that kind of stuff, they'll never be able to support themselves. I finally came up with my exit strategy, Byron. It's called the rapture.
I like that.
That's my exit strategy. Well, that's when we'll be done. And
I think some of those don't factor in the situation of government politics that are involved too. I don't know what type of government Honduras has, if it's similar to other Central and South American countries.
It's like ours, but extremely corrupt. I mean, as far as the parties, you know, you've got 2-party system and a few independents, one term for presidents. So basically, they get in there, do all they can for 4 years, and then they change up.
The other leg, or I know there's really 5 pillars that support point of impact, and what you guys are doing is, and we talked about it some. I want to talk more about it. Is the discipleship element, and just the materials. Of course, the Bible I know is foundational for that. Right. Talk about that aspect of it.
Well, we're very fortunate that all of our pastors, all 5 of our pastors, have been seminary trained through a John MacArthur seminary that's about 100 miles from Tegus. So they've all done that through extension and being able to stay there at different times. So that's a great foundation for them theologically. There's a lot of strange theologies, you know, in Honduras. A lot of it's really hard to explain, but it's just bad theology. Yeah. So giving our pastors the foundation, and then with the foundation of saying, okay, someone makes a decision to follow Christ, that's not the end. That's the beginning. And the beginning starts with one-on-one discipleship or small group discipleship throughout the week, and then ultimately, you know, church on Sunday, and then ultimately at some point baptism. But then that life on life, you know, we've got to build men. And what's really neat to see is the number of men now that are in our churches, because where it began years ago was our pastors being trained and then training their men in their church. And we've just installed our first elders in all the churches. which is a milestone to be able to take leadership that we don't pay and have them come in and help lead our churches. So that was a giant milestone for us this past year to be able to do that. But as far as discipleship goes, it's I won't say easy, but it gets done very well with the kids because they're there and we have them all day every day or half day every day for 5 days. With adults, it's a lot harder. They're working, they're busy, they're trying to maintain their little households. So getting them to come and take away time and to sit and if you came in the neighborhood today in one of our buildings, I guarantee you that you'll find somewhere in a room somewhere you'll see 2 people knee to knee with their Bibles open, going through the basics.
Wow!
And that's where you got to start them.
David, when you're at home, it's just you and Ruth, and you're kicked back on the couch, and you're just thinking about all of what God is doing. What brings you guys the most joy thinking about what God's been up to through your lives?
Wow. I would say probably being, I know you say at home and on the couch, but, well, let's just use that because in my upstairs living room, there's a lot of pictures. And 2 of my favorite pictures are the 18 kids that are in an orphanage. Sorry.
It's okay. It's okay, buddy. It's okay.
Those kids have been rescued from sexual abuse, physical abuse, just outright mistreatment, left in the streets with parasites and all kind of nasty stuff. Now they're in us beautiful homes with parents that love them. And in private school, 3 of the girls are getting ready to go to college. Matter of fact, my oldest daughter's moving down there to be the house mom for those 3 girls. That probably gives me the most joy, just seeing a changed life, a life that went from torture to having just a peaceful life and growing in Christ and loving each other.
Wow, you're making me cry too. That's okay. This is great. This is great. I just was thinking about the words of that song, "Rescue the Perishing." You know?
Yeah.
And man, that's what more is there for us in this life is to rescue those who are perishing.
Yeah.
And like you said, the lives that these dear children are now experiencing because of Jesus and because our hearts. And just think about, David, if you hadn't answered that call, if you hadn't been moved or you hadn't allowed the Spirit of God to move on your heart the way He did and break you about these needs of the poverty and the spiritual condition of these people in Honduras, I mean, there wouldn't be this work,
right?
You know?
We can always go back to James 1:27, one of my favorite passages. And that, in the Matthew 25 with the sheep and the goats, basically Jesus says to us, it's the difference from what you did and didn't do. He said, when did you visit me? When did you give me food? And when did you give me clothes? And we say back to him, I don't remember ever giving you clothes, Jesus. I didn't go visit you in prison. I didn't think you served time. And then he looks back at us and said, what you've done for the least of these, you've done it for me.
Yeah.
When those kids are all around me calling me Poppy David, it'll mess you up.
It will.
Yeah.
In a good way.
Yeah.
In a good way.
Yeah.
Well, our time's slipping away, and I know that there's opportunities for listeners to connect with Point of Impact.
Absolutely.
Even take a trip. They could actually join you and go on some of these trips to Honduras or Africa.
Absolutely. The easiest way to check us out is to go to our website. It's poiglobal.org. You can also, on that website, you can, for the kids in Honduras, you can actually go through and see every child that's in our program. They're pictured. Their little short bios are there. And if you want to, you can sponsor one. For $30 a month, you can sponsor a child. And that 100% of those dollars goes to helping that child. There's no administrative money or any of that kind of stuff that comes out of it. My business, Impact Logistics, completely underwrites all of the administrative cost for Point of Impact, both in Africa and in Honduras.
So for the medical needs, the education, nutrition, those kind of areas, that $30 would help go to that.
Yes, and you can form a relationship with that kid. That child will begin to correspond with you, and hopefully you get to go meet them sometime. That's really cool when you get to do that.
I can't imagine what that'd be like.
Yeah.
Actually go.
We have 485 children. We have about 150 of them sponsored right now.
Okay. What's that website again?
POIglobal.org.
Okay. And there's all the information there.
Everything's
connect
there.
with you. Also, are you available to come and maybe speak to a men's group or to, say a Sunday school, say a church group or something if they're wanting to know more about Point of Impact? Could you do that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
We waited too long to get together, and we're going to have to get back together.
Okay.
I'd like to invite you to come back sometime and bring some folks who have gone and experienced themselves and let them tell their story, and we'll do that. Open invitation to you, by the way.
Okay.
But, David, thank you so much for what you and Ruth are both doing for Christ's kingdom to change lives for the least of these in Honduras, Africa, and wherever else God puts your feet in your mind to, okay?
Okay. I appreciate you having me, Byron. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Friends, that's all the time we have on this edition of Mid-South Viewpoint. Thanks for stopping by. I'm Byron Tyler. We'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.